And I think it illustrates really well because you see the Frankenstein monster as Donald Trump, and I think the idea that he is the kind of metaphorical Frankenstein is something that everybody can understand. And here the Fox News executive is pulling the switch saying, "I've doomed us all." And it's very appropriate because what Donald Trump embodies is actually what conservatives themselves have made, going a long ways back. And we're going to take a look at that tonight, and then kind of switch gears and look at why conservative leaders, particularly in the Republican Party, are so against Donald Trump and are actually scared of him being the Republican nominee. And there's a reason behind it. And just kind of look at ways that we can counter what Trump is doing. So why is Trump the GOP Frankenstein? Well, he's a product of their framing dominance. He doesn't realize it. It's unconscious, but he embodies the conservative frame. And a few points to note there. For example, socioeconomic hierarchy. He is known to be very misogynistic, have very 19th century views of women. He feels that he is morally superior because he's rich. How many times do you hear him say how rich he is, how wealthy he is? He is a big believer in this idea that government is immoral except for two things, except for defense and to basically free up the private sector, to let the people who dominate the private sector make as much money as possible, concentrate their wealth, which goes along with the third idea that success and wealth are the result of being moral and disciplined. So you hear him all the time talk about how much smarter his friends in business are than people in government. He considers people who work in the public sector to be stupid, to be useless. They're unable to work in the private sector, so they work in the public sector, that kind of thing. And then this idea that personal liberty is paramount, and to coin a phrase, trumps everything else. He repeats this fairly consistently across issues. And then, of course, the idea of fear, whether it's immigration or the kind of nationalistic ideas that he represents, all tend to center around the idea of fear so that people feel like they need protection. So I want to go back to 1964 and play you some examples of how conservatives created this Frankenstein monster themselves. And we're going to start with A Time for Choosing, which was basically a half-hour commercial run during the 1964 presidential election for Barry Goldwater. And Ronald Reagan did this speech on behalf of the Goldwater campaign. And they basically bought up a half hour of network time on all the major networks in the country. So everybody in the nation was exposed to this half-hour speech. And it was the first time that the conservative frame, the pure conservative ideology, was laid out in a single platform in one given time. So we're going to start out, this is just a less than 2-minute segment, and we'll come back.
But as a former Democrat, I can tell you Norman Thomas isn't the only man who has drawn this parallel to socialism with the present administration. Because back in 1936, Mr. Democrat himself, Al Smith, the great American, came before the American people and charged that the leadership of his party was taking the party of Jefferson, Jackson, and Cleveland down the road under the banners of Marx, Lenin, and Stalin. And he walked away from his party and he never returned till the day he died. Because to this day, the leadership of that party has been taking that party, that honorable party, down the road in the image of the Labor Socialist Party of England. Now, it doesn't require expropriation or confiscation of private property or business to impose socialism on a people. What does it mean whether you hold the deed to or the title to your business or property if the government holds the power of life and death over that business or property? And such machinery already exists. The government can find some charge to bring against any concern it chooses to prosecute. Every businessman has his own tale of harassment. Somewhere a perversion has taken place. Our natural unalienable rights are now considered to be a dispensation of government. And freedom has never been so fragile, so close to slipping from our grasp as it is at this moment.
And so, towards the end of that short clip, Reagan lays out the metaphors that exist today. First of all, the idea that socialism is this terrible thing that is taking away freedoms. But more importantly, towards the end there, he talks about it literally being about life and death struggle. That government has basically control over your life and death, and how freedom is slipping away from our grasp. So that's a drastic change in 1964, because up until that time, we had just built an interstate highway system, come out of wars, and invested in education and the GI Bill, and a lot of very democratic socialist programs coming out of the Eisenhower administration. But here, Reagan is laying out this conservative idea that government is immoral, and it literally threatens your life. And we've seen that, building throughout the years. So, going forward, just a few months to Barry Goldwater's acceptance speech in 1964. Even though Goldwater lost, what's critical about his campaign was that he basically standardized the conservative ideology of thought in public discourse. So much to the point of having been accused of being a radical by more moderate Republicans, and even, of course, progressive Democrats, but saying that no, radicalism is okay because this is a life and death struggle. So here's Barry Goldwater. This is a clip of his acceptance speech at the 1964 Republican National Convention.
And let our republicanism so focused and so dedicated not be made fuzzy and futile by unthinking and stupid labels. I would remind you that extremism in the defense of liberty is no vice.
Skip the. Just want to do a quick pause. You see Richard Nixon sitting there, but the idea that extremism in defense of liberty is no vice, right? Reagan laid out the frame. Government is impeding on people's liberty, and now Goldwater is carrying that forward by saying that defending that personal liberty against government is no vice, even to the point of extremism.
And let me remind you also that moderation in the pursuit of justice is no virtue.
Extremism. So there he's equating conservatism with justice, obviously in defense of liberty, and that moderation is not appropriate in defending that liberty that conservatism stands for. This is a huge deal. And you can take these two speeches, and when I put the webinar up on the website, the links will be there for these videos. I would encourage you to watch the entire 27 minutes of Reagan's time of choosing speech, because it's really important as to where we are today, and especially with the creation of the Frankenstein monster that is out of control at the moment. Because those words from 1964 relate directly to today. So now let's fast forward to today and look at how this is, moving forward, again, kind of out of control. The monster is loose. And this next video is Donald Trump's victory speech in New Hampshire. And this is quite a hoot, but considered in the context of what you just...
We're going to do it the old-fashioned way. We're going to beat China, Japan. We're going to beat Mexico at trade. We're going to beat all of these countries that are taking so much of our money away from us on a daily basis. It's not going to happen anymore. We have the greatest business people right now in the world. They call me all the time. They want to be involved. We have political hacks negotiating our deals for billions and billions and billions of dollars. Not going to happen anymore. We're going to use the finest business people in the world. We are going to do something so good and so fast and so strong, and the world is going to respect us again. Believe me. So we're going to take care of the economy. We're going to take care of jobs. We're going
to... from 19... So that's quite enough of that. But it's you see the similarity there. The idea that the world's going to respect us again, that the business people are going to be what makes America great again, and government has to just stay out of the way. And in fact, that all government should do is let these business people do their thing. And everything will be great. America will be great again. I mean, when he says "Make America Great Again," that's what he means. So that is kind of the embodiment of this monster that the Republicans, not necessarily Republicans, but conservatives have created. So let's look at reaction to Donald Trump, because we all know what he stands for. We all know kind of who he is and what he represents. And again, the Frankenstein metaphor being very appropriate here. So let's look at some reaction from actual Republicans, from conservatives, in terms of why are they so afraid of Donald Trump. And the first clip here, this video, is from Charlie Sykes, one of the most influential conservative talk shows in the entire country. He does a Sunday morning show called Sunday Insight. And, oh, I got the wrong one there. Hold on. He has a show, Sunday Insight, and one of his regular panelists is Michelle Lichens, former state representative, and Republican. Okay, here we go. So Sykes is going to ask Lichens how you see the Republican race playing out, and she's going to
fade Or is he on track to win the nomination? So let's start with you. How do you see the Republican race turning out here? Donald Trump is leading the national polls. Is he going to cruise to the nomination?
I certainly hope not. You know, The Atlantic had a great article out right before Christmas talking about the people that are supporting Trump. Middle-income, white Republicans, for the most part, who don't trust elected Republican officials anymore.
Say something, right? I love that line. So the people who are supporting Trump are white middle-class Republicans who don't trust government anymore. Where's the irony there? Like, Michelle Lichens did everything she could to undermine the state government, the public, when she was in office, and all of her friends who are still in power, like Robin Voss and Alberta Darling and Leah Buchner, they are doing the same thing. They're trying to undermine government, and here she is saying, I hope Donald Trump doesn't get elected because the people who support him are these Republican middle-class white people who don't trust government. Right. You have created this situation, so that's a little bit of irony there. So the next quote, this is this link here. There was a great National Review article, and if you don't want to read the whole thing, I've got some good segments here, and I'll suffer reading through it so you don't have to. But they had this great issue devoted to conservatives saying, don't vote for Trump. So here's David Boaz, who's the head of the Cato Institute, and the Cato Institute is a libertarian think tank. And here's Boaz saying, not since Wallace has there been a presidential candidate who made racial and religious scapegoating so central to his campaign. Trump launched his campaign talking about Mexican rapists and goes on to rant about mass deportation, bans on Muslim immigration, shutting down mosques, and building a wall around America. So here is a conservative leader, libertarian leader, talking about this idea that, well, I don't like Trump because he's running on this socioeconomic hierarchy, which is central to our frame. So again, you've created this situation as a libertarian kind of wing of the conservative movement, this idea of nationalism, and yet you rebuke it. Fascinating. So here's a quote. This is Mona Charen, who's the head of the Conservative Ethics and Public Policy Center. In 2012, Trump derided Mitt Romney for being too aggressive on immigration. And Trump has made extensive use of illegal immigrant labor in his serially bankrupt businesses. Who, except a pitifully insecure person, needs to constantly insult and belittle others, including or perhaps especially women. So again, consider how this fits in with the conservative frame, right? The idea of using illegal immigrant labor to make money in business is something that government should have no say in, because the market will determine what's right and what's wrong. And again, the whole idea of socioeconomic hierarchy. Wealthy are such because they're moral. And then this idea of insulting and belittling others, including or perhaps especially women, again, goes right along with the hierarchy of men over women and Americans over other nations and so on and so forth. So another conservative who's not for Trump. So here's Ben Domenech, who's the publisher of the Federalist magazine, another very conservative publication. And so I think everybody on tonight has good experience with the conservative frame, and we'll be able to see how what this person is saying is consistent with the frame. Trump assures voters that he will use what? Authoritarian power for good. Well, that's what the conservative frame is all about, because good is defined by the authoritarian figure. Very interesting there. And then he talks about a government of the people, by the people, and for the people is precisely what the Constitution offers, and what is most threatened by great men impatient to impose their will on the nation. Now, all these people are exposing something that I'm hoping you pick up. And I'm going to have a question about it in a little bit. But on why these people are afraid of Trump. And it has to do all with unconscious framing. So here's the first poll, and I'm going to ask you to open the poll. So go ahead and vote. How would you explain the concern of these conservatives with Donald Trump? From everything you've heard, and is it they're just not as crazy as Donald Trump? They are just smarter than the people who are voting for Trump? Are they biconceptual? They're partially progressive? Or they disagree with Trump on a specific issue? So go ahead and cast your vote. And if you want to vote for more than one, feel free. Okay, we're back, and everybody has voted, and I'm happy that many of you are recognizing that there are conservatives who are not as crazy as Trump, and that they're smarter than the people voting for Trump. The response that I was going for is that they are biconceptual. And we actually had kind of a split result. We had the same number of people voted for the first three. So, you know, I'll take the not as crazy and they're smarter. I'll take that as a response that's legitimate, because I think that's very true. But let's look at the biconceptual thing, because this is really important in terms of how we can forward progressive ideas. Is that, so these conservatives who are, in quotes, afraid of Trump, what they're expressing is that they believe in this idea that government has a role, that government is important. Like in spite of all the confused rhetoric, they believe that private depends on the public, right? In terms of business, you know, our protection, our security, that the public should be responsible, that we should have an effective, responsible government that protects and empowers people, and that democracy needs responsibility. So, very selectively, they believe this stuff. And if they didn't have that biconceptual progressiveness going on in their brain, then they wouldn't be reacting so harshly to Trump, right? They are present. And the way we know that they're present is that, you know, a lot of the best collections of polls and the overviews of polls are saying that as long as Trump stays in the race, he's going to garner about 25 to 30% of the Republican vote no matter what. Right? That is pretty consistent with the number of people that George Wittkopf says are probably have no progressive, you know, or very little progressive framing going on in their brain. The 25 to 30% of people in this day and age, because of the dominance of the conservative frame, are unswayable. And so we let those people go, and we focus on the people like, as several of you pointed out, are smarter than Trump, the average Trump supporter, and not as crazy as the average Trump supporter, to activate their progressive frame. So I want to have you just think about this. I'll give you a few minutes to respond, because it's a short answer. This is an open-ended question. Just think of areas where conservatives in your community are biconceptually progressive. And I think this is an important question because it gets us on the road to recognizing that we can talk to conservatives about things that we share values with. So I'll give you a minute to fill out. So I can relate to one kind of very general area where the whole biconceptualism is active in conservatives, is the idea of, as I wrote in a recent Thinking Points journal, the idea of local control in terms of the community democracy. Not necessarily a conservative frame of local control, but of community democracy or local democracy or something like that. I think a lot of conservatives are biconceptually progressive in that they want their community governments, their community democracies to be effective and responsible to protect and empower people. And I think that's a place to start the conversation. So quite a few people have voted. We have, so yes, they like to pay for roads. They support the police, was one response, right? So, and the idea of infrastructure, that's something that we do together. It's a great, they complain about paying taxes, but then complain the roads don't get plowed often enough. They want their roads taken care of, and they expect that. So again, effective and responsible government. And the idea of, this is interesting. So somebody wrote that some of their colleagues in city government were actually supportive of the Day Without Latinos. So that's interesting. Restaurant owners or grocery store owners or something, that there were stories in the paper about stores and restaurants closing, who likely many of those owners are primarily conservative, but yet they have this capacity for empathy. So that's a great one. And yes, local government, local democracies are critical. And another area where people are biconceptuals think in terms of research and health research and the medical community and investing in things that will make our health better. Think in terms of education, particularly in rural areas. That's a response that came up. So start thinking in terms of that and going out and relating to people. And the important thing about that is that many conservatives are biconceptual. They're not mean or sad. I mean, I have a lot of conservative friends. Most of my family is conservative. You know, they're not mean people. They're not stupid. They have the capacity for empathy, and it needs to be reinforced by us. So if we start to consciously think about how to activate that in them with how we present issues and how we discuss things with them, that will unconsciously get them to start thinking about it and activating that frame. And these conservative pundits are a perfect example of how that can happen. So, and you know, I mentioned local government. I just want to give an example of how that applies to framing. And so if you take the things that these conservative pundits believe, these three principles here, and then apply them to an issue that conservatives dominate, so in your community, so whether it's education or healthcare, you know, create a short message evoking these ideas, right? That local governments have the responsibility to do these things, provide opportunity and freedom for everyone. I mean, that's a great example of the day without Latinos today. That, you know, our government, the public, has a responsibility to provide those things for everyone, not just people who can afford to buy it or have the political power. You know, that they're public servants charged with ensuring the future of the community for everyone. And then, once you provide that frame, you can tell how and what your opponents have done to violate that moral responsibility, or what you would do to uphold that moral responsibility. So very important differences there. And what I want you to notice is that framing provides you the messaging foundation for every issue. Right? It's not just within the issue silo, as we'll see a little bit when we talk about bills that are being fast-tracked through the Assembly and the Senate, but Stephen Arnold making a great point, the so-called idea of fiscal conservatives kicking obligations down the road when it's convenient, and resulting also in further weakening government, further weakening the public. So while it appears hypocritical for them to do that, it fits into their frame because it creates this downward spiral of constantly defunding the public and defunding what we all invest in together and transferring that wealth to the 1% and the large corporations. So that's a perfect observation. So translating to every issue, irrespective of what you're talking about, and we desperately need that. So we'll move on to what I like to call the conservative bill blizzard. And what do all these bills have in common? And the last half of the webinar here, I want to get you thinking in terms of connecting the biconceptual effective messaging with how all these bills are connected. Because what I've observed is that during the last 4 years, every time the GOP-controlled Assembly or Senate presents a bill, the minority party and the Democrats go into the whack-a-mole mode, which is, here's a terrible bill, we need to respond and whack that down. Here's the next terrible bill, we need to respond and whack that down. And one is about women's health, so we need a message on women's health. And one is about the environment, so we need a message on the environment. And one is on education, so we need a message on education. And what ends up happening is you get fragmented within the caucus because every legislator addressing each issue that they are talking about, they have a different message and nothing connects. So you continue this, again, kind of vicious cycle of just playing whack-a-mole. So I have a list, and believe me, we could go on, because there were around 100 bills that were run through in the last few days, and they're still in the process now. If you go on WISI, it's up there. Kind of a top bills, and what's really interesting is you see people posting in social media about, well, these aren't creating any jobs, or these bills have nothing to do with anything. They're just pure political patronage. And I would disagree, because there's a connection with all these bills. So you have eliminating special election deputies at voting sites, making more student loan debt tax deductible. This is kind of the Republican response to the student debt crisis, is that we'll just make more of it tax deductible. Increasing penalties for drunk drivers. Requiring schools to report certain crime data. Creating an experience-based teacher licensing for specific subjects that are quote-unquote high demand, primarily vocational subjects. Tightening public benefit regulations. This idea that private property trumps the public good, so that people can do more of what they want with their own property without consideration for what's best for the public or the community at large. This one is interesting. Prohibiting state agencies to work under state and federal rules if it will cost the agency more than $10 million. Limiting the wetlands designation by the DNR, creating a stricter standard for considering something to be wetlands, the defunding of Planned Parenthood, and then what caused the protest today, restricting the sanctuary city anti-immigration policies. So basically forcing communities to impose whatever terrible anti-immigration policies the conservative state government puts into place. So here is the question. Get the poll open here. The question is, just very briefly, what connects all these different bills? Think in terms of the conservative frame, some of that we touched on before, but there are several answers here, but just to get an idea of what it is in the conservative frame that connects those bills. And I will tell you that the first thing you think of will probably be the most accurate, because this is kind of well, what's the word I'm looking for? Perspective check in terms of that we see all these terrible bills that we think are terrible, and they are so offensive to our moral certitude, and yet our first response is to not look at them and say, well, what is the connecting factor here, but how can we respond to each? So trying to get you to think in terms of how are they connected in the conservative frame to help us counter them effectively in the progressive frame instead of instinctively reacting to each one. As I said, there are more than one right answer, so don't be shy. Throw it out there. I'm not going to name names, so everybody's anonymous unless you do as Steve and Nancy did. If you type it in the chat box, everybody can see who it is. So, okay, we're just about there. Just give it another few seconds here in case somebody. Yeah, and everybody's voted. All right. So, what do we have? Yep, we have basically private over the public. Government is immoral, reducing government. Yep. Oh, very nice. Somebody actually put down this idea of father knows best, the authoritarian figure. Really good. Yes. Private rights over the common good. And somebody picked up the idea of punishment. Perfect. They talk about punishment for wrongdoing, right? That's why schools need to report crimes. Why, we all agree that drunk drivers should be taken off the roads. But just the idea of increasing the punishment, nothing to do with therapy, nothing to do with working people out of their alcoholism or whatever their issue is, lock them up. Exactly right. The strong father, strong authoritarian father model, absolutely. And then the whole idea of the punishment, right? So people don't obey, or if the public does not do what the authoritarian figure says, they'll be punished. So you all hit it right on the head, and well done. And yeah. If you want to add more in the chat box because you hit submit too early, feel free. But that's right. So let me just go back to the previous screen. Like, look at every one of those bills. It has to do with personal liberty, right? The government has no say in what decisions you make, that the public is immoral, that we need to get rid of government regulations, except for example, tightening public benefit, because those people are poor, they're immoral, they deserve to be poor. So we shouldn't give them the safety net, because then they won't be disciplined. Political activity on city time. Wow. Political activity on city time is grounds for termination. Yeah. Because who's to say what that is? Right? Who defines what that quote-unquote city time is? That's, yeah, interesting. So good, you've all got a handle on that. And just to provide you an example, so this is the whole idea of whack-a-mole, right? So you would never know, listening to some Dems in the legislature, that these bills are all connected, that there's a moral underpinning, right? And I'm not going to name names here because I don't think it's necessarily fair to call somebody out, but just the idea that this is conventional wisdom, and you see this more often than not. Republicans go for cheap political points and offer a legislative package that does little to help the hundreds of thousands who face student debt. Citizens ought to know the truth about this and demand more from the officials. Well, okay, look. You're not telling people the truth. You're not framing it correctly. And the idea that it's cheap political points, for conservative Republicans, it's not cheap political points. Right? The whole student loan thing to them is an issue of discipline. Right? The public should not be involved. It's a matter of discipline. So, right, that's why they do tax incentives. Because if people have just managed their home budgets correctly, and they're disciplined enough to get a good job and make money, then they're fine. And that's their self-issue. It has nothing to do with the public, right? So this Democrat is offering no moral counter to what the Republicans, and in fact is basically going to just continue to issue silo effect. Here's another one. Mean-spirited attack by Republicans on immigrant communities that incites fear among those likely not to trust law enforcement. Now, Republicans are trying to undo years of work to build trust between immigrants and law enforcement. Okay, first of all, let's start at the top of that. Basically, what this person is doing is they are evoking the conservative frame. they want to incite fear among people because that divides them and reinforces the whole self-interest frame. And those already likely not to trust law enforcement, and the idea that there's been a lot of work done to build trust between immigrants and law enforcement, I mean, that's contrary to much of what's actually going on. And in fact, Republicans are helping to break that trust down by evoking this idea that the public is immoral. So this person is actually reinforcing that entire conservative ideology. And again, continuing to create issue silos for progressives and Democrats. So finally, this is kind of an overarching statement about how one Democratic leader sees this session. And yeah, that's a good, in the chat box, they point out, and this is a perfect example of that, they point out what's bad, but they don't point out what a positive vision is. And that's a perfect comment there. So this session can be characterized not only by the Republicans' harmful agenda, but their inaction on the issues that matter. Now, follow me on this because this is important. Now comes the list of issues. People. Burdened by student loan debt, no help for public schools, no effort to grow middle-class wages, no action on job creation and economic development, no solution to crumbling roads and bridges. All right, so there's the issue silos, right? The idea that Republicans in action, look, to conservatives or people who are bi-conceptually conservative, that statement doesn't even register for them. And I'll tell you why. Because on each of those issues, conservatives have taken a lot of action. Right? Student loan debt, they've taken action. Public schools, they've taken action. Middle class wages, in their economic frame, they've taken action. Job creation. And again, in their frame, they've taken action. And economic development and infrastructure. In their frame, they have taken exactly the action that they should. What Democrats aren't doing is, to again point out the comment in the chat box, they're not presenting their positive progressive vision and why that's important morally and how it's different from Republicans. Right? So this is why we're so fractured in Wisconsin. But there's hope. Oh, sorry, okay. This one's going to be, I forgot, sorry, I got on a roll, forgot about this poll. This is going to be a no-brainer, I think. Oops, hold on. That was the wrong poll. This is a multiple choice poll. So, did you hear anything that connected the Dems statements that you just heard? Was there anything that evoked the progressive frame in the Dem statements that you heard? And, you know, not on issues. You know, issues are one thing because conservative Republicans care about issues, the same issues we do, but it's different in their frame. They have different values. Okay, and it looks like everybody's voted. And yes, right. They talked about specific issues. They talked about the idea that Republicans are bad, that they're doing bad things, but there was nothing to connect them in terms of values. And what I'm going to show you now are some examples, because there is a better way. And here are some examples of, these are Democratic legislators who are framing really well. Okay? So, for example, look at this. This is talking about the immigration issue, the day without Latinos today. This is a great statement. Today I saw, this is a legislator press release, I saw teachers, firefighters, clergy, school children, etc., the people who make my community strong and beautiful. These brave folks are asking for safety and security, right? Protection and empowerment. They're asking that their families be kept together and the dignity that comes with the work they do each and every day in communities across Wisconsin. Right? That is a great progressive statement with a positive message and evokes the progressive frame. So, next. Here's another good one, framing the issue. Right? This is about the voter registration restrictions, getting rid of special election deputies. All right. The constant attacks on voter access by Republican legislatures. Right? So here's the idea that the Republicans are doing something bad. But this person says how and why. It's a betrayal of our shared Wisconsin values. What are those shared values? Well, guess what? They're progressive. Open government and encouraging citizen involvement through voting. So rather than restricting efforts, which is the negative, bad thing the Republicans are doing, you should encourage greater participation and empower, right? There's the idea of protection and empowerment, Wisconsin citizens to take part in our democracy. And you get the sense that that is our responsibility. So there is a great example of framing the issue. And I'm hoping that you see connections between these and that it works across issues, right? So here's student loan debt. This is another great statement from a legislator that student loan debt is a moral crisis. Our shared Wisconsin values insist that, again, our shared values, and they are progressive. Opportunity to succeed is a freedom that Wisconsinites deserve. No longer afford to, here comes the metaphor, suffocate our next generation's future with crushing student loan debt. Right? This is really good because it creates a metaphor for student loan debt and that we have a responsibility to provide opportunity for everyone to succeed. Right? This is really good stuff. And then guess what? There is a connection. And I'm going to give you an opportunity to tell me, and again, there's no wrong answer here, but I would like to get a sense of what you think is the connecting values here, the connecting moral message here. And we'll do this poll and we'll do a brief wrap up here. Yes, and I have the comment in the chat box. Excuse me. I love that suffocate metaphor too, because everybody can relate to suffocating, not being able to breathe, being buried under that student debt, and the responsibility we all have to free people from that. That is a great metaphor in this situation. So. Okay, so for the sake of time, I'm going to end the voting. If you didn't get a chance to respond to the poll, feel free to do so in the chat box. Like I said, I don't think there's any really wrong answers here. I'm just trying to get a sense of so somebody, the first one I looked at here is right. Each of those messages gets people thinking in terms of empowering other people, protecting freedoms, building stronger communities. Right, and all those things are related. Absolutely. The idea, it's this basic idea, and several of you talked about shared responsibility, freedom and opportunity for all, private depending on the public. This idea of an inclusive community that empowers everyone. Great ideas. So fantastic. So I'm excited about this because I think this is an opportunity for us to translate this into action. And I think one of the ways that we can do that is to break out of our kind of internal Facebook groups and Twitter feeds and things like that, and get out into the community and start speaking, I guess, to coin a phrase, truth to power through some of these ideas. And I want to challenge everybody, and I'm going to put this out to all the people, even the folks who weren't on this webinar, and challenge you to engage somebody, maybe a local legislator, a constituent if you're an elected official, or somebody in this kind of conversation, one-on-one, or maybe in a small group. And don't do it in terms of Democratic versus Republican or conservative versus progressive, but just bring up the ideas. Just start talking about the ideas in terms of some issue that a group of common people care about. And start doing that one-on-one and in person. And put that out there as a challenge. And I'd be happy to hear about experiences and things like that. And maybe in the near future we can open up a chat room on that or something and share ideas. So there we go. If you have any questions, comments, I'm going to do a little teaser here because we've got about a minute left. I am in the process of putting together a statewide kind of campaign, if you will, that I'm going to bring kind of half-day presentations, workshops, and training sessions to 6 or 7 regions around the state, and provide foundational framing kind of training and review for people, followed by an intensive message creation workshop for people in these regions of the state. And so look for news of that coming out very, very shortly. And one of the goals I have is to have self-identified people in those regions who want to train as trainers. And I'll be creating a whole sequence of basically workshops and things like that to train trainers and kind of create pockets of this in communities that we can then network through a variety of organizations. Because I think this is a foundation that needs to happen very quickly, because you have great groups like Blue G Nation. Bernie Sanders is creating a lot of excitement. He's framing really well. And now's the time we can activate this. So look for news on that. And everybody have a great week. Thinking Points comes out next week. And the next webinar is going to be on March the 17th. That might be St. Patty's Day. So we may have a St. Patrick's themed webinar. So, thanks everybody. Have a